I'm Jeremy Ratt. I'm half Indigenous and half white. Pieces is an all-new CBC British Columbia original podcast. This is a story of being stuck between two worlds, and not really fitting in with either of them.
So because I don't have darker skin or long brown hair, that therefore I was not Indigenous.
You don't have to be a residential school survivor yourself to be traumatized by residential school.
Pieces. Listen to it now, wherever you get your podcasts.
This is a CBC podcast.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I'm Phelan Johnson. Indigenous people have rich and complex relationships with music. Songs shape us. And as our communities grow and change, so does the music we make. That change can be difficult, but through art and music, we can often find ourselves. Today on the show, how Indigenous musicians are reclaiming their identities through music.
Who I was as a person and what I wanted always had to be pushed down and suppressed. And I always had to watch what I was saying, watch what I was doing, and I always felt like God was looking over my shoulder, and I never felt like I was good enough.
Every time you come out to someone, you say like, hey, I'm gay, or hey, I'm a lesbian, hey, I'm trans, hey, you're preparing for that person to disown you. You're preparing for that person to not accept you.
And she said, listen, I knew your mother, and she never stopped looking for you. And so she gave me my aunt's phone number, and I hung up the phone and I called her right away. And I was on a plane to Winnipeg the very next day to meet my family.
That's today on Unreserved. Singer Jaylee Wolfe was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, a community that had very strict rules. Jaylee grew up not knowing her father, a survivor of the 60s scoop, that saw tens of thousands of Indigenous children from across the country taken from their families by the Canadian government and adopted out, mostly to non-Indigenous families between the 1960s and the 1980s. As a child, he was stripped of his identity. So was Jaylee. She grew up in what she calls a doomsday cult, raised as a Jehovah's Witness in a small town in BC. It wasn't until she was 17 that she learned who her father was, and that he was Indigenous, a member of the Saulteaux First Nation. Jaylee's identity has shifted through the years. The community she was raised in forbade engaging much with the outside world, let alone making music. So she left, to discover who she really is, and pursue a life of self-expression. Jaylee Wolfe joins me now from her home in Toronto. Jaylee, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So that song that we just heard, Child of the Government, it centers on the trauma your dad and family experienced in the 60s scoop. You wrote this incredibly personal song about him, but what did you know about who he was when you were growing up?
I didn't know much. I knew that, I thought that he was of Mexican descent, and my mom told me that he struggled a lot with addiction issues, and that was all I knew of him. And then being in the religion, I just never really thought to, reach out. I saw him one time on a street, actually, and I was just walking down the street with my grandmother, and my grandma just kind of looked like, oh, wow. And I remember just her being like, do you know who that was? And I was like, yeah, that was my dad. And I'd never seen a picture of him or anything. So that was really the only thing I knew of my dad. I saw him once. He had dark skin. I thought he was Mexican, and he struggled. That's all I knew.
Did you know it was him when you saw him? Did you just have a sense that it was him?
I had a sense. I guess you just know things like that. It's weird because I'd never seen a picture, and we were just walking down the street. It was one of those really weird moments because I remember my grandma just sitting in the car being completely baffled that I knew that that was my dad. I think I must have been 7.
Wow. And so you didn't have much of a relationship with your dad or a relationship at all when you were younger, but you did end up connecting with him in your late teens. And it's actually his voice in this song that we just heard. Did you want to include that?
That just sort of happened because my dad, when he was still really struggling with alcohol addiction, he would call me, and I sometimes would answer and I sometimes wouldn't. Sometimes I wanted to have, my boundaries up, and On this particular night, I remember being in the studio, and so I answered it, and I just hit record because I thought, I'm just going to show him how he sounds, like what he says to me. So I wanted him to hear himself when he was very drunk. I wanted him to hear how he talks to me. Sometimes it was really, really bad, and I wanted to be like, listen, this is what you sound like, and like you need to go get help.
When he called you, that voice recording that's made its way into the song, this is sort of one of the conversations where, in a way, he was taking accountability for his actions. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that was one of the first times that I did feel like it was somewhat of an apology. It was somewhat of like, sorry that I wasn't there for you, and that, this is what's happened, but he was sort of saying, like, I recognize I've been through a lot and how it's affected me and then how it's affected you as well. And, I'm really proud that he's in counseling now. He's doing therapy. He's working through so much of his own trauma. And we're both doing that. We're both doing that simultaneously. Me more so through art right now, but, it's great. It's been a really healing time for both of us.
What did he think of having his voice? Obviously, I'm assuming he's heard the song and did he have any reactions to hearing himself in it?
Yeah, he teared up. He got really emotional, and he said that he's very thankful for the whole experience, actually. I wasn't sure how he was going to handle it, especially with me being so raw and honest about our relationship and how he is. And, in the beginning of the song, it's like him basically saying he has no one. So I wasn't sure if he was going to be okay with being that vulnerable. But I showed him the song, and yeah, he just teared up. And I guess ever since the song and the video has come out, he said this has been incredibly healing for him. And he's really happy that we did it, that we told this story together.
When you were a child, you were raised by your maternal grandmother as a Jehovah's Witness. The community had rules for how you should live. What was that like?
It was really hard because I felt like who I was as a person and what I wanted always had to be pushed down and suppressed. And I always had to watch what I was saying, watch what I was doing, and I always felt like God was looking over my shoulder, and I never felt like I was good enough because you'd go to these meetings where that's where you're taught that you're not good enough, that we're waiting for perfection in paradise. And right now it's about, getting other people into the religion, following the rules to a T so that God will allow you to live through Armageddon. It was really stressful. Like my bedtime stories were people dying at the end of the world. And, you looked at these pictures and you're like, I don't want that to be me. So I didn't want to follow who I truly was because I thought it was, Satan's temptations and things like that.
Who were you told you had to be? Was there an ideal?
There was an ideal. It was a very modest woman that, kept her head down, probably got, married at a young age, looked up to her husband as the head of the house, spent most of her life, dedicating most of her life to going out in service, is what we would call it, which was door-to-door work, basically going out in different neighborhoods and bringing other people that weren't Jehovah's Witnesses into the, basically trying to indoctrinate other people. That's sort of the ideal. Spend as much time as you can in door-to-door work. And there's a lot of rules, tiny little rules that you have to follow. So basically just being perfect.
You've learned about you learned about your Indigenous roots. You are Soto and Cree, and you've said that has helped to deprogram you. How so?
Yeah, it has. Because when I started to really look into my culture, who I really am, the truth of who I am, my identity, and what feels right for me, it was really important for me to go up north and meet my biological family. And I'm very lucky that I know who they are. So I had that. I knew that they were up in northern British Columbia. I'm part of the Soto First Nations community. And it was important for me to go up there and talk to people like my great-grandmother and my grandmother and learn. And it's amazing because, I never even thought about the patriarchal system that I live in. There's so much about, I was becoming a real workaholic. And when I left the religion, I went straight to okay, now it's work for me. It's just all about like making money, and learning about my culture just kind of grounded me and made me look at the world in such a different perspective. And I see us all as one. I see how we all sit in a circle in this life. And I think about the strong matriarchs, and I just, it really has. It's gone hand in hand. Learning about my culture has gone hand in hand with my healing.
And would you say that there were any similar moments, kind of like the moment where you saw your father and you just knew? Have you had any of those moments sort of when you've been exploring your culture?
I mean, I had just such a magical moment when I looked into my great-grandmother's eyes. It was such a beautiful, I just felt like there was this healing that came over me. And then we sat down and she made bannock over the fire, and we sat down with it, and she was talking to me about her dreams and how she's seen me in her dreams. And I remember just being so, it just felt like magic, really.
And so what was it like to finally visit your family on Soto First Nation?
It was so beautiful, like just meeting my cousins and going out into the woods, and like one of my cousins was teaching me how to like forage, and we were making tea over the fire. And I have such amazing aunts. Like they're just these really cool aunties, and they're so funny, and they're just these strong women. And I was like, wow, I want to be like them. You know, I looked up to all of them. I still look up to all of them. And again, I have to mention my great-grandma, because she just changed my whole life. Meeting her, she taught me, she wanted me to speak Cree. It was so cute. She brought out this little book, and she was teaching me like words in Cree, and it was awesome.
It sounds like you're sort of having those bedrock Indigenous moments of meeting the aunties, getting your great-grandma's cooking, and hanging out with cousins. Those things, those are very important in our culture.
Yeah, exactly.
So when I first met you, you played country. You played a folky country. You were a girl and a guitar, and then you moved towards more of an electronic sound with your band Once a Tree, and now you've ventured into another solo project. What have these different musical identities given you?
I think I'll always be a folk artist at heart. It's my favorite type of music. I think that's definitely where I've come from. Like, I remember the first time I picked up a guitar, and what I felt was like a coming home. So I will always be a folk artist at heart. And I hope that with my solo project, I'm going to be putting in, more of that guitar laid back. You'll see with the next singles that are coming, there is definitely elements of folk. And that's where I identify, I think, the most. But I love with what I'm doing with the new project, and especially this EP, is I'm bringing in some pretty dark elements to match the storytelling. And I do vibe with the electronic stuff too. I really do. I think it's just all fun. I think it's so great to take different genres and create something. Like, I don't put myself necessarily in a box, but if I had to choose one, I think it would be the folk. But I think it's fun that I get to play with all these different genres, and I get to bend and just like, whatever strikes, whatever the mood. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just like to play around with different things and not keep myself in a box.
You're releasing another single soon called Hush, and it's about being bisexual, and we're talking about identities on the show today. So what were you able to say through that song that you hadn't been able to say before?
That I'm not afraid anymore, that I'm not afraid to just be everything that I am, and to have all the, I used to demonize my desires because of the religion, sure, and then after I left the religion, just because I had shame and I had guilt, and I had to let go of all of that. And when I started to write this project, that's when I really stepped into who I truly am. And so I thought it was an important part of my identity, my sexual identity, because it's been something that I had to hide when I was younger, and then I just felt shame over it. And now I'm like, no, I'm proud. I'm very proud of every part of me. And I don't care if it hurts anyone anymore. I don't want it to hurt anyone, but I'm saying, like, my family, if they have judgments about it, that's okay. But I'm still going to be me, and I'm still going to talk about it. And I'm going to be true, and I'm going to live openly.
So you've said that music is like a mirror to you to help you see yourself. So when you look in that mirror now, what do you see?
I see someone who is brave. I feel pretty brave. I feel happy, which is something I never thought I'd be able to say. And I feel like I'm true. I feel like I'm being true to myself finally. I'm curious,
how has the rest of your family reacted to the release of the new single? And I'm sure they're anticipating the album.
Yeah, everyone, I can't even believe how positive it's been. So, like, my biological dad, he was adopted, and he has this, big family. And yes, he had a really hard upbringing. But as they got older, it's been really cool. Like, my aunts, but I didn't really know them very well, but they're my adopted aunts. And they're just like, this is so amazing, what you're doing. They're all so supportive. His adopted mother has messaged me saying, I'm so glad you're sharing this and talking about it. It's been really amazing.
Was that surprising?
Yeah, I didn't want to hurt them because I know they didn't do anything wrong. They just adopted this little boy, they didn't know. And then my Indigenous family has been really supportive as well. So, like, my aunts have all shared the video, and it's been awesome. It's been really, overwhelmingly just, it's the messages that I am getting from people who have experienced similar things. It's heartbreaking, but I really am glad that I put it out.
It almost feels like an artistic coming out, Yeah. It's so very honest and so very raw, and I think it's incredibly generous of you to share yourself this much, because I think it will offer other people hope.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I hope so. I mean, I hope that it offers hope.
Thank you for talking with us today, Jaylee.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, I'm Michelle Shepard, host of Uncover Sharmini from CBC Podcasts. In 1999, 15-year-old Sharmini Anandavale disappeared on her way to a job that police believed didn't exist. 4 months later, her remains were found in a wooded ravine. I revisit the case that has stayed with me for over 20 years, ever since I first covered it as a cub crime reporter for the Toronto Star. You can find Uncover Sharmini on CBC Listen or on your favorite podcast app.
This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169, and Native Voice 1. I'm Phelan Johnson, talking all about the link between music and identity on the show today. Madison Wayne recorded her first album, Save Our Hearts, years ago, but sat with the songs until she could afford to give the album a proper release. The Ojibwe musician is a survivor of the 60 scoop and was included in the recent federal settlement, which she put towards her music. Welcome to the show, Madison.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me.
So you've been on quite the journey to discover who you are. You knew you were adopted, but you didn't know that you were a part of the 60 scoop. Can you tell me how you discovered that?
So I learned about the 60 scoop because my adopted mother sent me a link, and I read about it, and she said, I think this applies to you. And that was really heartbreaking to learn, especially since I was always told that my mother was an alcoholic and that she couldn't care for me. But I do think the discovery really started when I was approached by Donna Marchand. And at the time, she launched a court challenge against the government to strike down sealed birth records. So being a part of that court case, I had to obtain affidavits proving that my records were sealed. So I called Sudbury Child Services, and the woman answered the phone, and I could hear her, typing away and opening up my file and, knowing all my information was there. And she said, yeah, sorry, I can't give this to you. And so I said, will you sign this affidavit? And she said, absolutely. And then she asked me if I still had long auburn hair. And I said, yes. And then she asked me, do you still have the strawberry birthmark in the middle of your forehead? And I said, yes. And she said, do your eyes still go green when you get angry? And I said, yes. And at this point, I was absolutely floored. And then she said, well, I wish you luck in the court case. And she hung up the phone. And I sat there completely stunned. And several minutes later, the phone rang again, and it was the same woman. And she said, listen, I knew your mother, and she never stopped looking for you. And so she gave me my aunt's phone number, and I hung up the phone and I called her right away. And I was on a plane to Winnipeg the very next day to meet my family. And I did think that I was going to meet my mother. But when I got there, I was told that she had already passed away. So it was that trip that really changed my life. And I was introduced to my brother and my sister, and I found out I have 4 more siblings, one of which I still have to find. But yeah, it's continued to this day, and I feel really blessed because of it.
So when you visited your family in Winnipeg, what did you learn about them?
Gosh. So, from, Manitoulin Island, and we had a lot of family, I guess, in the States, which wasn't the States back then. Mm-hmm. I found out that my mother came from a family of 18, and I have over 600 nieces and nephews. So really, really, really big family.
That definitely lengthens your Christmas list.
Yes, definitely. And I haven't met all of them yet. So
that's some big auntie energy.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it's neat to discover, my roots, and that I guess I always knew I was Ojibwe, but I got to learn a lot about customs and ceremonies, a lot of sacred stories that were passed down, and a lot of things that I'm not able to share, but I think one day I will be able to.
That is a huge journey. My body's just covered in goosebumps hearing you talk about that. So you joined the 60 Scoop settlement, the federal 60 Scoop settlement, and applied it to your album. Can you tell me about that?
Well, it was very empowering. And really quite a phenomenal experience for me. It enabled me to catch up to my dreams, but it's also enabled me to share my story with the world. And I think that that's helped me heal from a really traumatic past.
And so, how does it feel to take something so painful and, from your life and turn it into art?
It's life-changing. It feels amazing. I wouldn't say it feels like there's retribution, but it definitely feels like I'm more complete.
Tell me a bit about your new album, Save Our Hearts. What was the inspiration behind the songs?
I would say on the deepest level, the album really is about the desire for connection and to be loved. So I had suffered postpartum depression after giving birth to my son, Raven. So writing helped me really work through that. So it's really a personal journey through heartache, a lot of darkness, a lot of longing, a lot of desire, but still with a glimmer of hope and resilience, I feel. But I think that I was searching outside of myself for something that I needed to find inside of myself. And in the end, that's what the record did for me.
And so normally when an artist releases an album, they go on tour, they play shows, but we're in the middle of a pandemic. So how are you going about promoting the album?
So I guess lots of social media. We hired good people to work with to do our PR. We shot 4 music videos back to back when the settlement came in, and doing interviews like this, and really being supported by the CBC has made all the difference in the world. You guys are amazing. So,
well, thank you. I appreciate it, but I also appreciate all the work that you've done. It doesn't sound like you're resting on your laurels at all. It sounds like you're doing the virtual hustle, as many artists are. So what kind of response are you getting to the album?
Oh my gosh, I am floored by the response. Everybody loves it front to back. I've had people reach out to me who are actually Indigenous and who've gone through the same kind of struggles that I have. And they've told me that my record has really helped them get through it, back on their feet, which brings tears to my eyes because, that's the whole reason that, I'm making music. I think that it's the reason musicians make music, and just tons of support, like support from all over the world. It's mind-blowing. It's amazing.
And so what's next for you? What do you have coming up? Anything coming up for you?
Well, I'm writing. So I'm recording demos, but we're also shooting 3 more music videos. So we have 1 in the bag ready to go. So we'll be launching those in the next couple of months. I have a acoustic version of Sweet Talk, and I'm hoping maybe even to put out another song. I wrote during the pandemic. It turned out really, really nice.
And when are you releasing your book, How to Be Productive During a Pandemic? I would like to get a copy of that.
Well, I'm working on an autobiography right now, so that will come after.
That is fantastic, because I was listening to you speak and listening to your story. I would read that, most definitely.
Thank you. Yeah, it's I've been trying to write it for my whole life, and I did an interview with Tom Lanhan for Pace Magazine, and he said, "Do you know what your next step is?" And I said, "Yes, it's writing an autobiography." And I've written chapter after chapter since having that conversation with him.
Well, thank you for taking the time and chatting with us today. I look forward to all the things that you're going to do.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity. It was really, really nice chatting with you guys.
Madison Wayne is an Ojibwe musician who recently released her first album, Save Our Hearts. This is Unreserved on CBC Radio 1, Sirius XM 169 and Native Voice 1. I'm Phelan Johnson, talking about the connection between music and identity on the show today. Juno Award-winning artist G.R. Grit is claiming their space and stepping into the spotlight. The two-spirit transgender Francophone Anishinaabe and Métis artist has just released their first solo project, Ancestors. The work is a sprawling mix of electronic sounds, guitar, and vocal melody. It's also their first release since going through a number of very personal changes over the last several years. G.R. Grit joins me from their home in Sudbury to talk about it. G.R., welcome to the show.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. So, I want to know, did you grow up with music in your family?
I feel like not so much. It's so strange because I know my parents are music lovers. Like, they have like a nice collection of music, and I remember us like having a CD player like back in the day, and it was like a huge deal. I can't really recall them like sitting down and listening to music. It might just be because we were, I have two brothers, and so like 3 kids is a handful. So maybe it was like we never have time to listen to music. But if I step out of like my nuclear family, my nana played piano by ear, and on my father's side, I think of my papa, who is like a fiddle player. And so I have like aunts and uncles who are singers and who play music, but I can't recall a time where I like sat down and played music with them. But I think it was just, being around it when we would get together for like family gatherings and stuff. Kind of back in the day when you got together, you put on music and you danced and you played music together, kind of thing.
So I'm curious about the title of this album, Ancestors. Can you tell me where it came from?
So Ancestors comes from not only the one of the tracks on the album, but it also comes from like the fact that this album is all about like my nana, my family history. And so for me, I really wanted to write something that spoke to that and kind of honored them and honored my nana especially. I think like I'd heard often in Indigenous circles about like, your ancestors are there for you. Your ancestors are listening to you. They're there to help you and this and that. And I'm like, I wish my grandparents were still here. I wish my nana was still here, my papa. And so for me, I think it was like, sure, that's all fine and dandy, but I'm kind of like, mad that my nana, she didn't see 70, and I think that I just feel like she could have lived for another 20 years. And if I really dig into why is it that she passed away in her 60s, late 60s, impacts of colonization. And then I'm like, who's responsible for that? Sorry, I'm like all like emotional. Give me 1 second.
There's nothing like talking about your ancestors to get you a little verklempt, I would say.
Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who was your nana?
Her name was Marlene Sear. She was born Marlene Rock. I spent one of my favorite things as a kid was that me and my cousins would all go and stay with my nana in Killarney. Like, she lived in Warren, but I don't know if it's like when my papa retired or I don't know. They returned to Killarney, and because they had always kept that house. I think it was my nana's father's house, and like so it had been in the family. I remember getting snowed in once, and it was just getting to spend so much time with them.
And I'm curious, did you have you come across anything that was surprising while you were researching your family history for this album? I know that you looked into your family history, so did you find anything that surprised you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. what I loved is that, over the years, I've met some folks who are from Killarney who really were there while I was there, but I think I was just like kind of a shy kid. And I think I'd been bullied so much that I was just like, I'm not even going to try and make friends with other kids around. I don't want to get like bullied while I'm away from school now, you know? So like over the years, I've met folks who are from Killarney that I'd never met before, but are around my age. And so what I've loved like just recently is going through family trees and like messaging these folks and be like, hey, what's your grandparents' name? What's your great-grandparents' name? And this and that, and figuring out how we're connected. Like, I had known for a long time that my great-grandfather had been enfranchised, so his name was Daniel Rock, and he was enfranchised in 1935. And so I remember my mom saying this, and she's like, yeah, we have the documentation somewhere. We were going through some pages together. She was showing me some stuff. She was like, oh, here it is. And so she shows me this paper, and it's the enfranchisement papers of my great-grandfather, of her grandfather.
There's something about that tangible moment of finding the piece of paper that ties you to colonization that can really send you reeling. Do you remember what that moment was like when you found it and saw it and read it?
So to me, it's so interesting that like you have a government body that wants to do everything imaginable to deny people their identity. And I don't agree with blood quantum, and I don't agree with Indigenous folks having to prove anything to a government. Like, that's just so backwards. It's like not the way at all. But when you're in that kind of colonial structure, and that's the only way you can assert your rights, your treaty rights, and your identity, and that through that lens, then you want to push and do as much as you can. So I think for my mom, I think it took her like 13 years to get her status.
So I want to switch gears a bit, and I want to ask you about the album. The first release from the album is called Quiet Years. What is Quiet Years about?
I saw this display, and it was about the silent years, and I guess the TLDR, like the short version is, you know, silent years is a name that the Haida used to describe the years that they were impacted by the smallpox epidemic, you know, that biological warfare happening against Indigenous peoples with smallpox, and then, you know, criminalization of culture and language, of singing, of potlatching, of ceremony, all that. And so having to kind of go underground and only teach those things in secret in order to survive. And then, you know, residential schools being put on the island by the Canadian government and by the, you know, religious folks. And reading about that, I'm like, well, what a parallel history to all Indigenous peoples on this continent. Also having my own quiet years in those moments of like, there's all this identity inside of me that I'm so scared to share because I don't know if I'm going to be safe if I share that about myself. So day in, day out, having to hide that part of me. And even when people ask, like, what did you do this weekend? Well, I can't talk about certain people, and I can't talk about certain things that I did because I'm like, what if someone finds out? Then does that mean my family will disown me? Does that mean that my friends will still be my friends?
What do you mean by that? I'm curious what you mean by that.
Well, when you're queer and you haven't come out to anyone yet, you know, every time you come out to someone, you say like, hey, I'm gay, or hey, I'm a lesbian, hey, I'm trans, hey, you're preparing for that person to disown you. You're preparing for that person to not accept you. And so me, like, being in rural Northern Ontario, and, you know, at the time, like, I didn't identify as trans, I didn't identify as non-binary or anything like that, or two-spirit, but at the time I was, you know, I was living as a woman, and I identified strongly as like a lesbian, and I just remember, like, I'd come out, I think, when I was 20 or 21, but leading up to that, it was very much like I have to keep that hidden. So if I have a girlfriend, I'm not going to share that.
But you did come out. You have come out, and you've actually described your career or your life as a series of coming out.
The running joke is like, how many more?
Let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, you know, of coming out, you know, as a lesbian, and then coming out as maybe queer I think it was more like lesbian and then changing my name and that being a coming out, and then changing my pronouns and that being a coming out, you know? So it's like, how many, you know, boom, boom, boom.
I like this, coming out with sound effects. It's
totally.
It's
great. So then it's the running kind of joke is like, how many more will there be? But also, like, I think if a person really reflects on their life, you know, they see their identity shift. And maybe it's not like having to do with sexuality and gender, but maybe it's about, you know, kind of other things too. But I think with sexuality and gender, because you have such a binary and it's so strong and it's so ingrained in everything. For folks who don't see it, they don't think it's a big deal. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You see it everywhere.
So with each of these coming outs, would you say that there was one that's really memorable to you or one that was particularly difficult?
It's always both. For everything, it's always both. It's very bittersweet because there's always really hard things, but then there's also really incredible things too. And a moment I can think about is my 25th birthday. I had just changed my name. I hadn't talked to my parents about it, and so my mom's on Facebook, and she's just like, "What is this about? People keep messaging me, asking me what this is all about," and you know. And I'm like, you know, in retrospect, I'm like, oh man, I should have just talked to her about it first. I probably put her through a lot of like awkwardness, but I was just so like uncomfortable with my name and like feeling so much discomfort like every moment of every day for so long that I just kind of like, I changed it and then I like turned off my computer and I went to bed or something. I think I did it like late at night and then I was like, I'll just wake up and deal with it. Something like that. I feel like that really kept me going. So like in that whole year afterwards of like people being so rude and so difficult and like really feeling like they could just share their opinions as if they were valid at me. I think, yeah, I would think of that moment. It would give me strength and it would remind me like, no, people do care about me and believe in me and see me as I am.
Thank you for chatting with us today, and congratulations on the album.
Miigwech, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to be on Unreserved and to chat with you.
That's it for this week's episode of Unreserved. If you want to get in touch with us, email unreserved@cbc.ca or find us on Facebook or Twitter. This episode was produced by Kyle Musica, Stephanie Cram, Zoe Tennant, Kata Dack, Sean Vanderklis, and Anna Lazowski. I'm Phelan Johnson. Now a go for listening.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.